All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So with us today, we got Dave Ackland from Amsys over in the UK, and he's going to be talking to you all about personalized applications for a very unique user environment. So with that, Dave, I'll give it to you.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming along. As Carl said, my name's David Ackland, work for Amsys in the UK. We're an Apple service provider and Jamf integrator. An old company, it's been going for 30 years now, and I've been there quite a long time, more than half that now, 16-year anniversary. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is getting software onto people's devices. We're going to cover each type of software, so iOS, macOS, touch on Windows briefly as well, just to kind of make it complete. But one of the more complicated topics that we always are looking at is macOS software packaging, and that's kind of one of the main focuses. And there's lots of ways of getting it. There's lots of ways you can do it, and there's lots of ways of getting it wrong. So this presentation is really just showing you some of the techniques that we use. So just as an agenda, we'll start off, and I'm just going to cover some of the goals that we look at, because it's really important when you're getting software delivered out to the users that you're deciding, what do you want to do? Do you want to customize the settings? Do you want to change the app, add some extra content, and so on? So we'll have a quick look at that. Then we're going to look at the macOS apps, iOS apps, and briefly just some of the ways that we deliver the non-Apple native apps. So starting off with the goal. Now, just to kind of set the scene a little, when we take, and I did realize this looks like a lavatory sign. Wasn't intentional, but, so it's a person. So you take a person and they can do their work, and you give them a piece of technology, and the idea is they can do their work better. And obviously these days it's all about the apps that go onto the devices. So given this scenario, where does IT actually fit in to this mix? A user can go to an Apple store, buy a Mac, then on that Mac they can just buy their own software, download it, install it. So we need to make sure that we're definitely adding value. So there's a bunch of different reasons why we might want to do this. For example, the user might not know how to install the software. The software could be really complicated. There could be loads and loads of steps where you have to put in server addresses and various other bits and pieces, and the users just don't know how to do it. What you don't want to do is have, say, the CFO of a company being the IT person and having to do everything themselves, because that's possibly the most expensive way you could deliver IT. But just to mention something we need to avoid, so you take a perfectly working piece of software, and then being the IT person, you think, okay, I can help here, I can add some value. So we get the IT department's input, and then you just end up with that. So this is the key thing we need to avoid. And it seems funny, but I see this so much. You think, actually, the user could have just installed the software themselves, and they would have been fine. All we've done is broken the software and caused a whole load of issues. Something else, just when you're considering the goal, is sort of thinking through what you want to do to that piece of software. So, for example, if someone installs Microsoft Office onto their Mac, if you decide that you want to change the way that works or the way the software behaves, you have to really think through what are you adding. So you might want to just deploy the base application on its own. You might want to change some of the default settings, but thinking through quite carefully sort of why are you doing that. And then possibly just adding some extra content to it. And some of the challenges that we'll kind of talk through this morning. So you might have decided that you're going to change the app somehow, and you know what you want to do, you just don't know how to get there. You don't know what approach to take because there's lots of different people talking on Jamf Nation and other places. Sometimes it's not always the right route. And in some cases you get those really unusual ones where you just don't even know what you're trying to do is possible. And I hit this sometimes where I get a piece of software, I'll invest a few hours and think, okay, this can't be done. Or it can't be done in a reasonable amount of time. Normally, our approach to overcoming these, trial and error in a nice safe environment, so just testing out different theories, but also just getting into the community, getting onto Jamf Nation, getting onto the Mac admin Slack and just asking questions. One of the best questions I always like to ask whenever I'm on Slack is, I want to reach this goal, what do people think? And then you get a good mix of views. So the main approach that we take is basically 4 steps. We always do a bit of investigation first, and I'll show you some of the techniques we use for that. The solutions, certainly on the macOS side, it's usually a package, a script, a config profile, or a mix of all of them. Then I'm sure everyone does this, so a nice testing phase. You don't jump to, okay, my package is done, scope to all computers, and then we're done. And then finally, documentation. So we're quite big on this, and for a whole number of reasons. But I've had cases in the past where I've worked out how to do something, not documented it, and then 6 months later I get confronted with the same challenge, and I'm like, okay, I didn't write down what I did, so I've just got to learn it again. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a couple of the tools that we use before we get into one of the main topics. This presentation obviously isn't one of these sort of what's in my toolbox type sessions, so just run through this really quickly. So Composer I'm quite a big fan of. It's got a whole bunch of uses, and I'll demonstrate some of them in a minute. Obviously, when you're doing investigation, you could just use the Finder. You can search for files, search for things that are modified recently. Some of the other things we use, obviously terminal, commands like OpenSnoop that can find out what's going on in the file system. A couple of other useful ones, Suspicious Package and Pacifist. I don't know if anyone's used these before, but these are really good at dissecting packages and seeing what they're doing. And then another product called Charles Proxy, which is very good just for spotting web traffic and to see when you're launching an application, what kind of URLs is it going to, and so on. So when it comes to building the solution, this is pretty standard stuff. So we're building packages, so we're going to be using Composer, sometimes the packages app as well. Scripts, we stick to what we know, so we're pretty much just Bash, Python, AppleScript. And then configuration profiles, and I always stick on MCX to profile there. That's a really, really useful tool for making customized config profiles. On the testing side, I'm a big advocate for using virtual machines. So when you're going through that first early testing stage and you think, okay, I want to build out this package or this solution, you need to keep testing it over and over again, and you won't get it right first time. But the virtual machine lets you snapshot, and you can just keep rolling it back and doing it again and again. We still always test on physical machines because sometimes if you went straight from a virtual machine and then started deploying to the users, you can just get some odd behavior, things like serial numbers and so on. And then the documentation side is a mixture of tools. Quite like Evernote, just 'cause it's nice and easy, very searchable, and we can share it with a group of people. If we're doing scripts and things, we tend to put them on GitHub. And then we have a collection of different tools in-house, internal databases and knowledge-based systems that kind of tie into our ticketing systems. Okay. So obviously, being British, we always like some rules to follow. These are just our main ones so any of our technicians, when they're doing a piece of work, will say, stick to these guidelines. First of all, work out what you're trying to do first. Don't just go, I'm going to launch Composer and make a package, or I'm going to repackage something. And sometimes if you challenge that person and say, why are you doing that? They couldn't even give you an answer. We follow the vendor's guidelines because otherwise you just end up introducing, they could bring out a patch to that software a week later, and then it just brings in more problems. We like to keep everything separate, and I've got that in one of the demos in a second for a few different reasons. This is one of our main, avoid repackaging with snapshots. I'm going to show you Composer in the snapshot bit, which you've probably seen before, just quickly, but we don't use that to actually make the packages because you just end up introducing more problems. Definitely trial and error, but in a safe environment, not sort of just experimenting on the users. And then documentation. And then we also have to look at the supportability, sustainability. It kind of ties into a couple of things. One is the following the vendor's guidelines. We don't like to build a package and say, okay, it's working. I don't know for how long, but at least it's working just for the moment. Also, that maintaining a layered solution leads into the kind of supportability of it, because if you just make like a monolithic package, you're just going to cause yourself a problem when you next come to make a change to it. So let's take a quick look at macOS apps, and this is kind of one of the main sections to talk about, because it's probably one of the most complex. And first of all, just some of the common issues that we're seeing. So first of all, too much or too little is installed. Sometimes you've got like an installer and it's got a load of extra optional items, and it's just putting too much on the machine. Sometimes you get issue with the deployed files. So deploy the app, and then something's got wrong permissions or something else wrong with it. Sometimes you get installers that are just really badly written. This is not usually a reflection on the developer that actually made the software, because they know how to do that part. They just don't know how to make an installer that works properly on Macs. So you have to overcome them. Sometimes there's updates needed as soon as you've deployed it. And then the other time is when it's not actually an installer or isn't a package. So we'll go through just the investigation side. First of all, you could just apply a bit of basic logic to this to do your first analysis. Is it a package? So if it is, our next step is it definitely a package? Because I don't know if you've seen the Sophos installer, it's got the package icon. It's like, yeah, nearly got us. So if it definitely is, then great. Test the packaging in Casper. And it's important to make sure, even if you've got a proper installer package, don't assume that it's going to work when you deploy it via Casper, because sometimes it behaves differently. It needs to be run locally on the machine. If it's not, is it from the Mac App Store? Yes, then great. We can go straight ahead, buy it in VPP and deploy. And if it's none of those, then obviously we're going to be looking at repackaging in one way or another. So the kind of things we're looking for, we just want to know what is the installer doing when it's running, where is it putting its files, what is it interacting with on the file system. We're always interested to know if it will support a config profile, because that will decide how we want to manage it. Our preference generally is config profiles if we can. And also, are there any server interactions during the install, or possibly when the app first launches? So you get lots of apps now that want to activate. So you might deploy it, and then when it launches, it's hitting a proxy and then not going any further. So I've got a quick example first off, just to kick this off. So we've got a bunch of slides now that are kind of more demo-based. So this is something you no doubt will have seen before, just taking a standard snapshot. So I've got a package on my desktop, and in these bunch of demos, I've got using an app called Audacity. It's just a small bit of music software you've probably seen. So do a new and modified snapshot, take the snapshot, and then I'll install the software. You'll be pleased to hear I have cut out bits of the video along the way, so we're not just going to sit here and go, let's watch it snapshot the whole OS. Great, so that's finished. Now, I know what was in this package before, and so straight away I can see a problem with this. It's picked up the application, which is good. It's also picked up the library folder, the system folder, the users folder. There's lots of other stuff that was modified in that period. So you get this big list here. Now, a different approach we can take is just using the convert to source option in Composer. So we take the package, drag it into the sidebar, and do a quick convert to source. And interesting, when you look at this, the package is quite different from the previous Snapshot version. So just to kind of blow this up for you, so left we've got the Snapshot version. But this is one of the reasons why we don't just use Composer to say Snapshot, install, second Snapshot, create package, because you just end up with all sorts of stuff inside there that you don't want. However, using Composer with that snapshot process just to do a bit of investigation and see what's going on, then it's fine. And we'd expect these two to be very different because a snapshot will only capture the end result of the install, not what actually happened in between. Okay, so building out this solution, we've got an example here. So again, using Audacity. So first of all, what was wrong with their installer, or why did I have to do anything to it in the first place? So first of all, Audacity itself comes as a folder just full of files. It's not an installer package. So I know, following that very basic flow chart, I'm going to have to do something to it to get it out there. Audacity comes with or as a separate module, an MP3 plugin. It comes in an installer package. When that installer package runs, it sets the permissions incorrectly, so no user can access it, which is really helpful. So the way I'm building out this solution, first of all, I'm just going to create a quick package for Audacity, because as I said, it just comes as a folder, so I'm going to have to turn that into a package. There's hundreds of different ways of doing this, but this is just a nice simple version. So a quick permissions change or ownership change. And then stick the version number in, and then we'll build it as a package. Okay. So next step, I'm just going to put the two packages straight into Casper Admin. Now, I don't mind that the MP3 plugin package has actually got a flaw in it, and it's going to deploy it with the wrong permissions, because I can correct that afterwards. The other approach that some people take is to take that package, rip it open, fix the issue with the package, and then create a new package. You can do that, but that means you've modified the package. What if later on they bring out a new version and it works fine? So stick them into Casper Admin, and then the work in the JSS or Jamf server. Sorry. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to make a quick script, and this is just to fix the permissions on the file. So nice and straightforward. Okay, so nothing too mysterious in there. And then after that, I can just go ahead and make a policy. And this policy is really just going to deploy the two packages and then run the script afterwards. So it deploys Audacity, deploys the plugin, and then fixes the permissions on it. And the reason we'll do it this way is we've kept each of those different components separate. We could have added a post-install script into the package. But then what if I want to make a quick change to that later on? If I keep all my scripts in Casper, then I could just make edits to them very, very easily. Okay. And then we're done. So key points on this. This one's quite straightforward. First of all, we had to make a package for Audacity because it came as a folder. We left the MP3 plugin intact and as it was originally intended, even with the flaw, and then just used a script to supplement and fix the issue afterwards. So moving on, I just want to, this is a slightly older topic, but not that often used, but it's quite useful. This is using the optional installs command. So we'll have seen this before, where you've got an installer and it's got a bunch of items in it. What if you don't want all of these things in here? And I don't know if any of you have used this before, but you can run the installer command on the package using the show choices XML option, and it will give you a list of the available flags that you can use to switch things off and on inside the package. I can then use that to make a plain XML file, and the XML file, that is literally it, that's the contents of it. And if the checkboxes were switched on by default, it will reverse it, so switch them back off again. That means I don't have to do anything to the Office installer. I could just use the vanilla installer as it is, supplemented with this XML file, and then it will remove certain items. So just show you very briefly what it looks like locally. So I'm going to run the installer command, put the package in. And then I'll add this apply choice changes XML, give it the XML file, and then obviously give it a target. And then you can see it's applied the choice changes. The end result on the right-hand side, you can see we've just got the 3 apps, and it's removed. It hasn't put OneNote on there and hasn't put Outlook on there. Okay, so this is quite useful for these installers that have optional items inside them. Okay. So the way I would build this out in Casper is slightly different. Again. So first of all, we're using the installer command, and we're applying a choice change to it. So we can't deploy the package in the standard way. So what I'm going to do is just package the package to start off with. So I'll make a folder in the temp directory, drag the standard Office installer into it, drag that into Composer, and build out as a plain package. So the job of that package now is to drop the installer into the temp directory on the target machine. And then over in Casper, I'm going to build out a script. Now, in this case, I'm actually just going to build out the XML file, but within the script. Because, as I said before, I always like this to be built in to the web interface so that I can make changes to it afterwards. I could have deployed the package and an XML file at the same time, but then what if I want to change it? If I want to add or remove a piece of software, I'm going to have to go back and make the package again. So this way, I can use a command to generate the XML file, give it the installer command afterwards, and then I can just go straight to making the policy. And the policy is going to deploy the package, then run the script, and the script is actually what runs the installer. So that's just a couple of quick examples. Now, when it comes to Mac App Store apps, these are obviously a little different. Getting the app onto the machine is dead easy because you just use VPP. And the options available to us, they are just a standard app. They're just being delivered a slightly different way. Being an App Store app, we like the fact that they tend to follow Apple's guidelines more often, unlike things like Sophos and so on. And we can quite often use config profiles. So I'm going to show you just 2 examples here. Now, I'll use this one, bit of a music theme for some reason in this presentation, but so GarageBand has got two things about it that if I deploy via VPP that I'm going to want to change. First of all, there's a welcome screen on first launch, and I'll explain why that can be an issue. And then the other thing is it's missing all the loops, all the extra content. So when you first launch it, it says, please type in your admin password and install all the loops. So the welcome screen, now if I was doing a one-to-one deployment, that's fine. I'll just leave it where it is because there's nothing wrong with showing the user, right, here's a new version of GarageBand and here's what's new. But if you've got a lab of machines, shared use, Active Directory, and everyone's logging into different machines, they're going to keep getting this over and over and over again. It's going to get really, really boring. So you can suppress it with a config profile. So in this case, we've used MCX to profile to generate this, and the basic key in there is welcome screen shown with a value of 1. That's it. So you deploy the app as is, plus this config profile, and that gives you your end result, and the welcome screen suppressed. And this works across all of the the iLife apps, iWork apps. And if you generate, you've probably seen this before, if you generate on these MCX to profile mobile config files, you can literally just upload them straight into the JSS. I'm just hanging on for the time when you can go in and more easily edit these custom config profiles, but it's not quite there yet. Okay. Now the other part is all of the loops. So a couple of different techniques you can use here, but I just want to give you a quick example of using Charles Proxy to grab all of the URLs. So I fire up GarageBand on a test machine, and it says, right, I'm going to download all of the loops. If I've got Charles Proxy running in the background, as the download is running, and this has been accelerated, so we're not waiting too long, and it starts showing you all of the URLs that it's using to get the packages. Instead of installing, I've got two options. One of the options is I can just grab all of the packages straight out of the Mac at that point, which works fine. We've used that a few times where we just take the packages, put them onto the distribution point, and then deploy them. There's nothing wrong with that at all. They're a bit buried, but the folder sticks out because it's several gigabytes in size. Got there in the end, right. So, two options you can do here. As I said, you could just take those packages and put them into Casper. So you deploy GarageBand via VPP and then grab the packages, that's fine. Something else we've done, if we're at a site where actually internet bandwidth is not an issue in any way, we could just have a script that loops through each of those URLs and downloads everything and installs it. And then all you'd have to do in Casper is have a policy with the script. It would just be a for loop and say, download from Charles, all these URLs I've got from Charles Proxy, put them into the script, and then it just loops through, downloads every one, and installs it. But also, I can modify that very, very easily. So that's the nice thing about using that approach. So just two other quick or shorter topics. Just want to quickly run through. Customizing iOS apps. This is kind of an easy one, just because there isn't really a great deal you could do to them anyway, unless you're a Swift developer, in which case you can build your own. But the main thing you can do with this is apply custom payload. So you can give iOS apps an XML file to change its settings, a bit like a configuration profile, I suppose, a custom configuration profile specific to that app. I'll say supported by some apps, and what I mean by that is it's just completely down to the developer. So if they've put the keys in there that you can use, great. the self-service app was actually one of the ones where you can give it a custom payload, because you can deploy it separately and then use a key to give it the JSS address. So there's no video needed here. You just you go straight into the VPP app side, and then you've got that app configuration tab at the top. This is one we had just for demo purposes. That was basically just took a web URL and changed one setting. I have seen that used actually quite nicely if anyone's used something called File Browser. I came across it a few times. It's just an iOS app that lets you connect to file servers, but they support these XML files, and you can preload it with all of the different server addresses. And so it depends on the app and what you're deploying. This last one, I just wanted to give it. It's kind of more of a quick mention. Just a few screenshots. There are some cases where we use remote apps internally at Amsys and for some of our customers where they've got maybe a Windows app or some other platform that's not going to run natively. Our preference when we're doing this is to use kind of remote hosted app functionality. So we're talking kind of Microsoft Azure, Citrix, and so on. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is no local Windows OS to support, because if you're deploying loads of Macs and then you have to deploy a VM as well, then you've basically doubled the number of computers you've got to support. Smaller security footprint, so there's just less attack vectors on the machine if you're not deploying a local OS. And then there's also less demand on the Mac client resources. So if you deploy a local VM for Windows, then you're going to have to double the processor and RAM and so on. So one of the ways we have done this, and it works really nicely, is using Microsoft Azure. And it's got two different approaches. One is it supports just remote apps built in. So you sign up for one of the apps. The users, they could just use Microsoft Remote Desktop. And it's got the Azure Remote app built in. So they click that, get access to the app. You can get to the point of having a working solution very, very quickly using this method. Until we came across this and said, Microsoft have kind of gone off the idea and said, actually, we don't like doing remote apps anymore. Thanks a lot. So they're going to switch. It's buried in the text there, but they're going to switch to Citrix XenApp Express as their preferred solution. So when I say Microsoft Azure remote apps are great, jump straight to the Citrix. So it's still in Azure, still hosted by Microsoft, but yeah, go for the Citrix route. They said they're actually going to stop supporting it, and then 31st of August 2017, which if you've got a big deployment of this, that's not a huge amount of time. The other route that we have gone down in the past is just using Azure, hosting a full Windows server that can deliver the apps as well. We do that when it's slightly more complex, or we've got lots of different apps we want to deliver. So the order of preference, so when we get people saying, okay, we want to run a certain app on their machine, we kind of have 4 choices really. The first one, a web app. This is our normal preference, just because the machine already has a browser on it, and as long as the app supports that browser, that's it. Nothing to do. Native apps, obviously more difficult to deploy, but you get more features. And then remote or Citrix app. And then our very last choice is always a local VM. So we kind of avoid that at all cost. Generally speaking, when we're deploying a local VM, it's going to be for like an IT person or someone that knows how to maintain that themselves. So that's me done talking. And I think it's over to you guys for questions.
It is question time. Are you ready?
Uh-oh.
There's a lot of good ones.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, come on. They're good. So moving back to the beginning of your presentation, the ownership change that you did to Audacity, why was that needed? And kind of, can you explain a little bit more about the permission change and what you did there?
Yep. So we spotted this problem when you deploy Audacity, you install the plugin, and then you log in as a user, launch Audacity, and the MP3 plugin says it's just not there. It's not visible at all. In Audacity, it tells you where it's looking for it, so we just jumped straight to that folder in Finder and saw, okay, it's owned by root and no one else has any access to it. So it was, yeah, quite straightforward. So then it's just a single command just to change the permissions.
And a little bit of background on that, I guess, is because policies run at an elevated permission level. So that's why it's probably coming in as root there. The other question that came in just a few minutes ago was, how do you handle the prompt from gatekeeper? And what's kind of the best practice to avoid them but maintain security?
Mm-hmm. So personally, when we're deploying things with Casper, we're not hitting that issue. Because of the way Casper deploys software, we don't turn it off at all. We generally just leave it in its default state. My personal preference is to put it into its highest setting, which works well for one-to-one deployments because you can then allow the apps that you need to allow, but it puts the machine into the most secure state. But yeah, when Gatekeeper first came out, and it was popular just to kind of, I don't know what this is, switch it off. But yeah, that's not what we're doing anymore.
Have you ever signed any PKGs before, or do you have any experience doing that at all?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we do that, for example, with a quick add package, because we had a couple of bad experiences in the past where we build out a user-initiated enrollment process for Casper, and then we send the users to the URL, downloads the quick add package, and then says, you can't run this. And obviously, most of the people in this room will probably know you right-click on the package, click open, and then it lets you open it, but no user's going to know that. So that's a case where we said, okay, we're going to need to sign it.
For non-native applications, have you used Wine or technologies like Crossover or some of those other virtualization technologies that kind of run in time or in parallel?
Yeah. Hate them. It's, yeah.
All right.
Just
short answer on that one. No.
Just it's like beating your head against a wall.
I think you touched on this slightly during the presentation, but going back to the Audacity app, why did you decide to run the script post-install rather than in the package itself? Because PKGs can have post-install scripts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that just comes back to the layered solution. So I like to keep the script separate from the package, if at all possible. The only time I won't do that is if I'm deploying it. I'm not using Casper or Monkey or any other tool. I'm just going to send the package to a user and say run this. Then I'd put the script inside it. But too many times I've done that. I've made a package with a script inside it, and then thought, I just need to make a quick change, and you have to go right back to the start and build the package again.
Where do you find the iOS customization settings, the app configuration? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll expand on this a little bit. Where can you find it within Jamf, and where can you find it about the application, or which applications support it? Okay, so you find it so you go into the JSS, click on App Store apps, or iOS apps, and then you add the app, and it's within that screen where you set the scope and settings for the app. There's just the app configuration tab. To find out what an app can do, you just go to the vendor's website, and they normally have it documented, usually buried somewhere, but or just send them an email or contact them. The next question I had is, when installing an App Store app like GarageBand, what troubles have you seen with Apple IDs, or what is your VPP strategy there?
So, I guess in this scenario we're only really talking schools, because I don't see businesses really asking us for GarageBand that much. So in schools now, luckily it's come along and it's device-based assignment. So definitely VPP and device-based for shared devices. We would still use Apple ID assigned VPP if it was a one-to-one deployment, but for any labs it's just device-based assignment.
Next question was within the Casper suite, or within Jamf. I'm screwing up the brand. Within policies, there's a few checkboxes, FEU and FUT, which stand for fill existing users and fill user templates. Have you used those? Comments on those type of options that that we offer?
Yeah, we used to, and actually there's still the very odd occasion where we would. Generally avoiding it now. Just, again, we like to keep everything completely separate and layered, so I'd rather run a policy and then have a login script that does that final change or configuration.
Next question was, the Jamf Pro can deploy, see I caught myself there, Jamf Pro can deploy either PKGs or DMGs, preferences, pros and cons, which ones do you prefer and kind of why?
Sure, so PKGs is by far and away the preference. It's also supported outside of Casper, so you could just send a user a PKG and say install this and it'll work. DMGs are only when you want to add something to the user's home folder. But as I said, we tend to try and avoid that as much as possible anyway.
Cool. So that's the extent of the questions that I got in Twitter. We've got just a couple more minutes of the session. I guess I'll open up the floor here. Are there any other questions from the crowd at large here? If so, raise your hand. All right, come to you. You're first, and then I'll grab you.
My question was, have you dealt with or worked with Adobe Creative Cloud yet? What issues have you run into through that process?
Let me repeat the question for you. Creative Cloud, how do you deploy it? What kind of fun stuff have you run into with deploying that?
Yep. So we just use the Creative Cloud packager. We've done it a bunch of times. It's got a couple of problems. Sometimes some of the edge applications can, they don't work fully. More often than not, it's just there's something wrong with the permissions when it's deployed. We like to kind of make individual packages for things, just because that means in self-service we can present each app, especially if a user's got like 128 gig SSD and they only need Photoshop. Deploying the entire thing is a bit unfair. And also trying to deploy the entire Creative Cloud suite as one giant package just gets corrupted, network timeouts, all sorts of issues. So we tend to break it up. If it's in a business, and that tends to be for schools, in business environments we tend to deploy, where possible, just the Creative Cloud app. User signs in and does their own thing. So.
MDM-capable users. We're K-12. We have students logging into machines once an hour. I don't know how to get rid of MDM-capable users. I'll look at a machine in the general list. It'll be like half a paragraph.
Right.
I wasn't sure we could look at that. Or I didn't look on Nation yet.
Okay. So removing MDM-capable users from the inventory of the device, really, is what you're getting at.
The reason why we have the MDM-capable users is so we can install, GarageBand, Keynote pages with our script.
Yeah.
So in the end, it sounds like you've got just a bunch of user home directories on that Mac is kind of the end result of that too, right?
Yeah. Exactly. We
Yep.
have a script to blow those away, but the MDM-capable users are kind of.
Yep. So I don't know if you've got anything on that one.
Yeah, no, nice, easy answer. No idea. I've never tried.
We can take a look at that later.
Yeah.
A couple other questions that came in. Actually, I think we covered those already. What other? Yes, sir.
Any experience with Finale, and if so, best recommendations?
Finale, best recommendations for packaging and deploying.
Not personally. One of my other techs might have done. So it's one of the reasons we use Evernote is any new app that we come across, we spend hours really dissecting it, working out how it works, how to deploy it, write instructions, and then share with the rest. But so if I come across it, I would then go straight into our Evernote, find the instructions. But yeah, I haven't done that personally.
One came in just now. You mentioned that GitHub, you post a lot of stuff to GitHub. Are any of the scripts or things that you've talked about here today published on GitHub, and are they on your GitHub or on the Amsys GitHub, or where to find that stuff?
Yeah, we put everything on our GitHub repos, Amsys UK, and we put everything in there. I haven't posted these yet, but I will do just shortly afterwards. So.
We've got time for one more question. Anyone else, or forever hold your peace? There you go. Yes, sir.
Question, but I have a response to whoever asked about Finale. Come see me after this session. I have a video lab with all music software. Talk to you.
Cool.
who it was, but I'll wait.
Just
Yep, I'll pair you guys up if you come down and see me. So the question answer finale, how to package it. Someone in the crowd knows. I would challenge you, post it to Jamf Nation so we can get this out so that folks can know. Awesome. So with that, big round of applause, and thank you very much for coming.